Our next speaker has had a wonderful history. Since 2004, this gentleman has been a senior lecturer in the Institute of Environmental Studies at the University of New South Wales. He has been a prolific author of many alternative energy books. I'd like you to welcome Dr. Mark Diesendorf, please.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. And right. And I have to say, Jimmy has a fantastic jazz group. So go and hear him at West Ryde at the Leagues Club before that season ends.
Sunday afternoons till the 10th of April.
Sunday afternoon, starting what time?
Till the 10th of April, 3 till 6:30.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. So that's great. It's good to dance to and everything. And you need a bit of that at present when we have governments, state and federal, and oppositions, coalition oppositions and coalition governments, and Labor oppositions and Labor governments, which are failing to seize the vision that David just referred to. Now, the film shows us that we already have a range of different renewable energy technologies. We could actually power the whole of Australia off renewable energy. We could make that transition if we had the political will. And unfortunately, the major parties are unwilling. They're in the pocket of the coal industry, basically. The big greenhouse polluters: coal, oil, iron and steel, aluminium, forestry in another area, another greenhouse polluter, and agriculture, cement. These are the big greenhouse polluters, and unfortunately they are ruling our state and federal governments on future energy policy. In Australia, you saw a range of different technologies. The length of the film didn't allow it to show everything, but these technologies work. They are safe, unlike nuclear power, which is currently having some real difficulties in Japan in the face of the tsunami and the earthquakes. They work, unlike coal with carbon capture and storage, which is probably at least 20 years away for commercial realisation, if it ever reaches that. But renewable energy works, and using energy more efficiently works. So we have these technologies. Some of them are at different stages of development. So there's an enormous amount that we can do within our own homes and businesses and factories to reduce energy wastage. I've been working at it in my own home, and I've got my electricity consumption down to 2 kilowatt hours per day per person. And I think I can still get down to maybe 1.5. And I don't live in a cave or a tree, I live in a house. And it's an old house, and it's difficult to insulate, and I'm still wrestling with some of the insulation problems, but it can be done. And with renewable energy, the new renewable energy technology that's cheapest at present is large-scale wind power. And in 2008 and also in 2009, wind power was the biggest contribution to new generating capacity, not in Australia, but in Europe. So this is a mainstream industry worth scores of billions of dollars per year in new capacity, actually hundreds of billions of dollars. Biggest contribution to new generating capacity in Europe. Now, when I look at New South Wales and when I look at Australia, I get a little bit depressed. So shortly I'm going to go back to Europe to get a bit of inspiration to cheer me up. The European Union has real greenhouse targets. It's going to reduce its emissions by 20% by 2020 compared with 1990 levels. It has a 20%, this is for the whole of Europe, a 20% renewable energy target for 2020, and it has separate targets for renewable electricity and renewable heat. It has a 20% energy efficiency target by 2020, and it's on track to meet most of these targets. It's actually a bit behind with energy efficiency, and that's actually the most cost-effective measure. But it's on track with the rest, and it's probably going to meet that target and more by 2020. For the long term, Europe has a target of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 by 80 to 95%. 80 to 95%. This is a complete transformation. They have the vision. And yet, in contrast, we have actually 3 countries that have recently been held to international derision in this regard. Australia, the United States and Canada. What do they have in common apart from a common language of English? Well, they are being held up as the most recalcitrant countries in terms of acting on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Australia is the biggest per capita greenhouse gas emitter in the world, and it's also number 14 in total emissions. So when people tell you what we do in Australia doesn't count, please don't believe them. We could do a huge amount. Now, compared with Europe, we have enormous potential, not only to generate all our energy from renewables, but actually to export in vast quantities. We could have a huge export industry with solar energy producing hydrogen and then exporting the hydrogen to Asia and beyond. Now that's a bit further down the track, admittedly. The hydrogen economy is not just around the corner, but it's something to look forward to. And yet in New South Wales and in Australia, we have pathetically weak policies from government. We had a few useful things in New South Wales. We had a policy to encourage solar electricity on our roofs in New South Wales. We had a feed-in tariff, but government stuffed up. Initially they set, I have to say, the ridiculously high feed-in tariff, 60 cents a kilowatt hour. There was a huge rush. Of course, people would make huge profits, and they are making huge profits. And the rush terrified the government, and so they reduced the tariff to 20 cents a kilowatt hour, which is below what some of us are actually paying for grid electricity when we take our green power into account. So they went to the other extreme. And then they pointed out that they had initially set a target, a cap, on total installations on solar electricity, 300 megawatts. And that this cap is going to be exceeded this year in 2011. So the whole thing has ground to a stop. Many, many retailers of solar systems are going bust right now as the result of that. This is sheer incompetence in government policy. Contrast the ACT. Only 350,000 people. They have an intermediate level of feed-in tariffs, about 45 cents a kilowatt hour, a reasonable level, and unlike the rest of Australian states, they have not limited tiny systems. They are now introducing feed-in tariffs, separate tariffs for medium-scale and large systems. So in the ACT, we will actually see some bigger solar systems built. They are also subject to a cap because every government is worried about electricity prices. At least, let me rephrase that. They're worried about increases in electricity prices from renewable energy. They're not at all worried, as David indicated, about the much bigger increases in electricity prices that are taking place right now that have nothing to do with renewable energy, everything to do with upgrading the infrastructure that has been let languish for a long time.